I am not exaggerating when I say that this podcast that I recorded with Dr. Jonathan Brajtbord has already, within a couple of weeks, immediately impacted my life. I mean, there is just so much that I'm excited to share with you that Dr. Jonathan had to bring to the table today and that he shared with me, and this conversation that we had together. Whether you're new here or you've been listening for a long time, one of the beautiful things about this show is that it introduces me to people, and I get to have conversations with people that I'm just not sure I ever would have encountered in my normal everyday life. And that to me is such a beautiful thing. This was one of those conversations that I said to Jonathan, it just felt like we were meant to connect. It felt like it was meant to happen. It illustrated, I guess, a path for me of what's possible. He shared some really valuable perspective around navigating relationships with your partner, and especially if you are working together or there's some kind of like coaching dynamic and how that can affect the intimacy in your relationship. We had some great conversation about depth and wanting to go deep with people, and this experience of trying to bring depth into relationships that maybe the relationship wasn't built from a place of depth in the first place. We got into all these deep, meaningful, beautiful topics, and I guess to tell you more about Dr. Jonathan himself, he is a urologist. And if you're anything like me and you've wondered, why do some of these doctors go into some of the practices that they go into, like a urologist or a gynecologist or whatever it may be, even a foot doctor? I asked Dr. Jonathan about that. How did he decide to go into urology, becoming a urologist? And that led to a really interesting place that I wasn't expecting, but also made a lot of sense. So here you've got this interesting gentleman who is a urologist and also does men's work. And we talked about how those two things sort of fit together in his life's journey. And Dr. Jonathan shares his story of becoming a doctor in the first place, some of the awakening experience that he went through, and now how that translates into some of the work that he does in his men's coaching. Anyway, I really love this conversation. As I said, it's had some immediate impact on my life, and I think it has the opportunity to do the same thing for you. So at this point, I'm just going to step aside and let you listen to the conversation that I recorded with Dr. Jonathan Brajtbord. Oh, and really quickly before we head into this episode, there were some tech issues during the recording, which pretty much just meant I wasn't able to edit it as I typically might. So if it sounds a little bit different, and there's just a couple moments where you hear some weird audio artifacts, that's why. Okay, here we go. Any other questions for me?
No, man, I'm always excited to dive into these conversations with guys who are, into talking about real substantive stuff as opposed to the superficial level bullshit. So it's great.
Tell me about why. Why does it feel important to you, or why do you enjoy jumping into going a level deeper, as we'll say?
Yeah, as you say, look, the reality is that when I grew up in Texas, I grew up in Dallas, and I, was a good student. I was a good athlete, and I never really felt connected to most of the guys in my school. I had a small group that I kind of developed as I got older, kind of a connection with, but I always felt like kind of the odd man out in lots of ways. And I thought I want to get to college, I'll feel more people will be able to have these kind of deeper conversations. I played football in college, and I actually kind of went the other way. I went kind of the opposite direction, right? I kind of fell into more of the locker room culture, more of the kind of superficial male banter, and it never really sat right with me. And now as an adult, my kids are 10, 9, and 6. And I like the local dads who we hang out with, but everything kind of stays for the most part superficial. It just feels kind of there's so much more there to every single guy. There's so much more there to all these different potential for conversations. And I don't give a shit about the weather, right? I don't give a shit about the traffic, or I could talk for 2 minutes, 5 minutes about the sports teams, but there's so much more going on in every single man's life that they're just afraid to talk about, or they just don't know how to bring up. And so I love diving in there with guys, especially guys who are open to talking a little bit more about this stuff, whatever it is, right? Whether that's struggles in your marriage or kids, how much life is just kind of coming at you. There's just so much more potential for guys to connect. I think we, as a male species, are just missing that, right? Women tend to do that a lot easier. And men, we just miss the boat on that sometimes. So being able to have these conversations, being able to like, actually shoot the shit of like real important stuff I get a lot of enjoyment and a lot of satisfaction out of it. So it's great. Appreciate guys like you are like leading the charge in that, in a really more public way too, right? Because I think the more that men hear and see and experience like normal guys doing this, the more it gives themselves permission to like take that, a little bit of a step and do that. So it's interesting, like, like we have like a local poker not tournament, but like, game that happens like every few months with these guys. And like, I'll try to like throw in like a deep question, like, so how are you feeling about your marriage? And they're like, huh? Kind of look at me like, wait, what are you talking about? Like, why are you going there? I'm like, oh, like, how do you feel about being a dad? And these guys are just like, what the hell, So sometimes we kind of get in there, but it's always work. It's like taking work to kind of pull it out of them a little bit.
Okay. So I love this idea of sort of throwing these test questions out there.
Yeah.
This is something that I have been experimenting with in my own life. So I work with my friend and coach, Nate, and I've had him on the show a couple of times. And, it's something that I've shared with him. I'm like, I want to go to depth with people. I want to, as you said, I want to skip all the stuff about sports and the weather. And like, let's just get to what is going on in your life. How are you, working through this human experience, and how can we figure something out about it together? I've struggled because we just kind of start to make assumptions like, oh, well, when I'm with this group of people, this is what we talk about. And if I were to throw out some kind of question like, hey, how are you feeling about your marriage? It would catch people off guard. And I've found myself, I guess at times, just nervous or scared to introduce something deeper into a conversation or a group or a setting that doesn't typically go there. So what has your experience been when you throw out one of those, feeler questions to go a little bit deeper? What happens?
I mean, the reality is most of the time you get hit with a little bit of a blank stare, right? And sometimes it happens, right? Like over cards, it's like people often don't want to talk about it. And, sometimes you get like a superficial answer, like, oh, it's fine, everything's good, right? But what I've noticed is that sometimes guys will circle back around to it, right? So like a half an hour later or like 20 minutes later, they'll say something again, a little bit deeper about it. It's like, oh, hey, look, like I'm actually having a hard time. Or like, I haven't been on a date with my wife in a while. I'm like, oh, great. Tell me more. Right. And so like, I kind of see it as like planting the seed a little bit, if you will. Like you're just kind of giving them a little permission to allow their mind to go there. Up until a couple weeks ago, right? Like I had an experience with a guy who I can get into, but again, it's like most of the time it's met with some resistance or some like blank stares. Occasionally they'll circle back around to it, which feels really good because then like you're kind of like feels like things are moving a little bit better in that way. Like, all right, good. Like we're getting there. But like I've found that when you can get somebody who plants the seed a little bit and you kind of just keep creating an opportunity for it, most guys will get to wherever they kind of feel comfortable, right? You're not going to get these guys who aren't used to having these conversations to some of the deepest levels of like their insecurities or their fears or like, what's truly overwhelming them. You just kind of meet them where they're at, right? And that's been a practice that I've had to learn with my own father, right? Who hasn't really not been able to have those deeper conversations. And it's been like, okay, I should kind of keep bringing it up. And it's taken years of like introducing these kind of deeper questions. And only now, 5, 6, 7 years after doing this, can he like start to carry that conversation. It's like one of my coaches said is like, it's like emotional pass, right? Back and forth, this like dynamic back and forth. And my dad just didn't have those skills to be able to throw that ball back to me. And there was disappointment in it for sure. But again, just kind of keep creating the opportunities. And sure, like you're that weird guy who asked the questions in like a friend group, but I'd rather be that than like not try, I guess, in some respects. So, well, what's your experience been like as you
I know what's probably happening right now. You just heard the ad music play. You're starting to tune out exactly what I'm saying so you can skip this ad and get back to the conversation, and I'm going to encourage you not to. Because if you continue to skip this ad in order to get back to the conversation, then at some point there may not be a conversation for you to get back to. Okay, now that I have your attention, that might have been a little bit exaggerated. Likely, I'm not going to stop producing this show, but you can help me make this show a lot more viable, and so I can continue doing this into the future. Fun fact, I don't make any money from this show. In fact, I actually pay in order to create these episodes on a weekly basis. And while that may not exactly seem like your problem or your issue, if you like meaningful conversations like the ones that we have here, well, then it is your problem. I could use your help in the form of financial support specifically in order to keep this show going and continually invest back into creating it. Here's another fun fact. If everyone listening to this episode were to donate the single cost of a cup of coffee, I could probably do this as a full-time job. That is a dream and a vision I have for myself one day, and I want this to be like PBS or NPR, where it's funded by the viewers. I'm imagining a show where we, together, collectively, decide that these meaningful conversations are important to us, and we don't rely on outside help or advertisers in order to keep them coming on a weekly basis. So yes, this is a long-winded way of saying I'm asking you for money. If you're in a place where you feel comfortable doing so, I am asking you to make a small donation to support the show. You can do that by following the link that is in the show notes of this episode to a place called Buy Me a Coffee. Now, by buying me a coffee through this platform, you're not actually buying me a coffee. It's just kind of a mental construct to make this transaction of money a little bit more tangible. Thank you in advance for considering supporting me, supporting the show, and for supporting meaningful conversations like the one we're about to get back to right now.
I think we have a slight delay, so our handoffs back and forth might come with a little bit of a delay to them. So anyway, I'll probably just leave all this in. To share on my experience, I think it's kind of mixed. Yeah, at times people are like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm willing to go there. I think, like you said, maybe what I could do differently, or some of the mindset shift that I could make, is understanding that people might not be willing to meet me in that place right away. And so I love this idea of kind of throwing a question out there and then giving people time to kind of marinate on it and come back around to it if they want to later in the conversation, and not kind of forcing people into it. I think I probably, not that I'm forcing people into it, but I'll ask, and if I don't immediately go into a deep conversation, I think I probably just kind of shut down and I'm like, oh, well, it's just not going to happen. Let's go back to talking about the weather.
Right, for sure. And this is what kind of experience with this one of my friends a couple of weeks ago has really kind of shifted in that way, because he was one of these guys who, we would ask the question, never really responded to stuff. And I coach a sport with him. I coach lacrosse. My son plays lacrosse, so I coach with him. He literally walked up to me on the sideline after practice one day. He was like, hey, I don't know if you've heard, like, my wife and I are like getting separated, and like we're going through all this stuff. And like, he kind of just like launched in. I was not ready for it, but like, here I am. Like, this is one of the things that I do is like hold space for men in this way. I'm like, great. So can we kind of dropped in real quick about it? I'm like, why don't we go grab a drink? Right. And like, I don't really drink much. So like, we like went to the bar like 2 or 3 days later, and like we had this incredible conversation, right, about like his struggles in his marriage, and ultimately where he is now, and the kind of like he dove into like trying to like heal himself and like get into therapy and do some work like this. And I was able to share with him like my struggles with my wife earlier in our marriage, and like how I wasn't that far off from where he was. I just was able to see some of the course correction that I needed to do so that I didn't get to that separation divorce part. But it just really allowed for us to have this like really beautiful conversation around this. And I think it was because some of these seeds were planted earlier that he understood or knew like that I was somebody whom he could go talk to about this, even though he wasn't ready to talk about it, 6 months ago, a year ago. Like, here he is on the sidelines of a practice event, just like launching into it. Which again, like, I never would have thought that would have been the case. And so sometimes people surprise you, and I think it's like not closing up those opportunities when they're there, and just being really ready for them to hit you kind of whenever they come, and being open for it. So it was cool.
I love this idea of planting seeds. I feel like that really makes it it's a good visualization for me, and to be able to think about planting the seed, watering it, and maybe you're not really sure what kind of seed you're planting, so you don't know when it's gonna sprout.
Right.
You're planting, you're watering, you're hoping that at some point the opportunity might happen, and then it just sort of out of the blue one day might happen. I want to go back to you talked about some of the relationship with your father, and I'm curious how did that affect you maybe as you were growing up, if you weren't able to connect with him maybe in the way that you were wanting, what kind of impact do you feel like that had on you?
For sure. I mean, it's a great question. I think my father's a great person. He's a great man. He was a good father to the capacity that he could be growing up, but he was working a lot. I mean, he was a physician, he's an anesthesiologist, so he was gone a lot. And I've talked about this before, so if he listens to this, he'll get it. But when he was around us as kids, he always felt distracted, right? So if we were like watching a sports game or watching a movie, he was reading the newspaper or like doing his like charting, or like he was never really kind of present in the moment. At least that was how I felt about it back in the day. And I didn't really notice it as much until my parents divorced, and they divorced later in life for me when I was in my early 20s. And I had realized at that time that most of my relationship with my father was through my mom, right? Or through the context of the family. And that was very much changed all of a sudden. And I was like, shit, like, I don't know who my dad is. I don't have this like good relationship where I can just like go talk to my dad. It was always in the context of our family. And it had really then started me down this road with my dad of like, well, I have to kind of create a relationship. If I want one with him, which I do, we have to kind of start doing this dance of like, who am I in my early 20s? Who are you in, your late 40s, early 50s? And it was tenuous at times. It was really awkward at times. And there was a lot of disappointment on my end because he wasn't able to access some of those emotions that I was hoping to try to like get out of him or like get in there with him. But kudos to my dad. And really, he has changed a lot. And I think it's been through, his new relationship with his now wife is fantastic. And she pulls that out of him, which is great. And my dad's been through therapy and he's been working on himself. And it's all of a sudden, like, I'm like able to have these deeper conversations with my dad. And, again, 7-8 years in the making, even longer now since they've been divorced, but I'm really trying to put in that effort. It's been really beautiful to witness and watch as our relationship has now grown to really reflect more of who we are and the type of relationship interactions that we both want to have with each other, which is great. So, the presence is still an issue. Sometimes I call him, I see him, like, I hear him like doing shit in the background. I'm like, Dad, like, if you're busy, just call me back. And so sometimes I have to kind of call him out on that a little bit still. Because again, I like that kind of like, look, if you're going to be here, I talk about this a lot with men. It's like full presence, right? Like, undivided attention, give yourself to whatever you're doing. Your kids crave that. I crave that from that you kind of like male, relationship, and the father-son relationship as well. So.
How did you actually go about starting to build more depth into relationship? I'm thinking about this conversation and thinking, I would love to build more depth to my relationship with a dad, a brother, a friend, whoever it may be, a father figure in their life. How did you actually start doing that? If it wasn't present in the first place, what were some of the steps that you took to build some depth into it?
Yeah, I mean, well, we had this like in our family system, right? We had this like huge fissure with a divorce, and like, so that was really the opportunity to like get in there and be like, Dad, like, how are you doing? Right? Like, what's going on? And so I think that kind of presented an opportunity to like get in there with him with it. Now, again, he was like going through his own, depression and issues around that. And then it's really been like a concerted effort of just reaching out and keep asking the questions, right? It's like, hey, Dad, like, how are you doing? Like, tell me what's going on. And then like, he'll like kind of ramble about like the superficial stuff for a little bit. And then it's like a little bit of redirection, right? It's like, no, Dad, like actually, like, how are you doing? Right. And now that we have kids and, it's oftentimes when we get together, it's around the family, right? Like my 3 kids and my wife and him and his partner. But like every time we were together like that, we always make it a priority to go do something, even if it's just for like an hour or two, just the 2 of us. So like that's been really helpful to like take time away from that like kind of crazy family dynamic and just be able to go spend time with him where like the 2 of us can sync up. And it takes some time for him to be able to drop in and relax into it. Again, it's getting easier for him, I would say, but the questions of like not just taking things at superficial face value and just, hey, how are you really doing? Right? What's really going on? How's your relationship with Sharon going? Right? His partner right now. And so it's just, again, digging a little bit deeper. And I've really let go of wanting and needing him to do that with me, kind of that father son. And like, yes, from like a family dynamic system, it's like I'm the son asking those questions. So there's that dynamic of it, but I've really and I've let go of my expectations around it too. Like I'm super excited about it when it happens, but I don't get disappointed when it doesn't because I've released those attachments to the outcome of it. And that's been a really healing process for me as well too, not expecting anything from it, but just really happy when it happens.
I really like this idea of letting go of some of the expectation and accepting that it might not always come in the way that we want. It might not be, yes, of course, the relationship dynamic is that one is the father, one is older, the other one is the son. And it can still be you as the son. You can be the one to initiate this conversation, this depth of relationship. Sometimes I think I can find myself wanting to default to, well, someone's older than me or someone's in a certain role. They should be the one. I want them to go initiate this. And that doesn't have to be the case.
Correct. For sure. Right. I mean, I think that's true also like with like, I have a younger brother and like my brother's more resistant to this stuff. Like he's not as open, 1 out of like maybe 25 times he'll be able to. When you catch him, you got to catch him. And you really got to take advantage of when that's the case. But again, it's letting go of the attachment of a desired outcome and really just being in the experience of it. You can have desires for it, but like if my dad can't meet that, if my brother can't meet that, or, my friends can't, like I have to be accepting of whatever that connection is. But again, I don't let go of the desire for more. I just let go of the attachment.
Okay. So I want to bring some more of your story and sort of life experience into this. I like just diving into and exploring how people make decisions and have gotten to where they are. You have such an interesting blend of you're doing men's work, you're a doctor, a urologist specifically. You live on a 24-acre farm outside of Boston. I'm curious as to how all these things both came to be, but maybe to start, my question would be, what do you see as the common thread between all of these things? If you were to identify, these decisions and these paths that you're seeking in your life, what's the common thread?
I think for me, the common thread has always been how to help men live more fully or more intentionally or have a better quality of life. Right. I didn't know really what I wanted to do in medicine. I played college sports. I thought I was going into orthopedics because that's kind of the typical like college athlete, doctors, orthopedic. And when I was kind of doing some rotations and then it was very cut and dry. Like there wasn't a lot of substance to it. And when I found urology, all of a sudden, like I was really interested in like the personal questions, right? Like talking to people about really personal issues, erectile dysfunction, right? Testicular pain, all of these things that guys didn't really want to talk about, but it was significantly impacting their quality of life. And I found that like I was actually pretty good at giving guys the opportunity to open up. Now I understand it's like holding space for men. And like literally that's what I do day in and day out with my patients, right? Like I never bring a computer in. I bring a piece of paper in. I just say, hey, how can I help? Tell me your story. And like these guys will just like launch into these stories, and all I do is hold space for them, right? And so it was just ways that I try to help men feel better in their life, understand the connection between their mind and their body, their psychology, their emotions in their body. That's kind of what I've started to develop a practice in urology. And throw in like my own personal crisis breakdown, of like, shit, like I'm not happy as I thought I would be when I got to this destination, which was like after all this time in medical school and residency, I was like, great, I am good. And then I woke up one day, I'm like, fuck, I am not good, right? Like I am still an asshole. I'm still frustrating. I have no patience for my kids. I'm a dick to my wife. Like, what the hell is going on? And I realized like I was missing so much of my own personal growth, my own inner work. And that just kind of set me down, my own journey, and started with Sacred Sons as an organization. That like was the first organization that really got through to me and kind of cracked me open, as we say. And then it's just been a series of like saying yes to opportunities, having mentors along the way, continuing to build my own idea of like what personal growth is for men and being accessible to them. When I was in the Sacred Sons leadership training and I was going through the process, like I was looking for men who were also professionals who were into this work as well. And there just weren't a lot of guys in that core. There were some, but there weren't a lot. And then I started looking for programs out there for men who, weren't just coaches or who, and it's nothing against them by any means, but like who weren't, yoga instructors or artists or musicians and who were doing this work. And there just weren't a lot of those guys out there. And so I said, shit, like I got to do this. And so that's when I created like my course that I run, and where I help, it's, inner work for professional men. It's the idea that we are husbands, we're fathers, we're men, and we have all these different stressors in our life. Like we're not doing things for ourselves, for our own growth. And it just kind of kept blending together. And so my like constant goal is like, how do I blend my like medical practice and like my desire to help men in this capacity together? And it comes out in patient interaction. Sometimes I always wish I could do a better job of it and explaining it and having guys buy into it. And some patients are really on board with it. They understand the stress and the anxiety, how that impacts their body and what some of the things they can do. And some guys are like, nope, I want a pill, give me a pill, like, get me on my way. And I'm just like, okay, like, that's okay too. But again, right, just like the conversations, there's so much more that we can do for men, and urology and this men's health and, the men's work that I do is just try to kind of keep bringing things together. So that's my like struggle and goal, as we say. So
it's so interesting. I haven't had a chance to have that many conversations with doctors. And I always find myself thinking about like, why do you go into a specific focus in your practice? And especially someone, if you're a urologist or you're like a gynecologist, you're always kind of like, why did someone choose that route? It makes so much sense to me as you're explaining this, as far as, boy, if you want to quickly go deep with someone, have them come and talk about something that is really intimate, really personal, something that they're struggling with, that they're probably embarrassed about, something that's kind of an awkward topic. And you're going to get, snap of the fingers, you're going to get right to the heart of what someone is going through. So I'm like, this makes so much sense now why you would choose that lane.
For sure. I say with the caveat that you have to go in open, right? So like so many times doctors go in with their own agenda or like their own idea about what needs to be done or what should be done. But like, again, I walk in and I'm like open. So I say like, look, tell me your story. Right. And like patients will literally just like spew everything because their first time they're given an opportunity in front of a doctor to really like talk. I very rarely interrupt them. I let them talk as long as they want. And at the end, they're like, wow, like even just getting out their story, they feel so much better because they've been holding it all inside and no one's listened. No one's heard them. And you can really start to change how guys think about their own health, their own body, their own emotions, just by giving them the opportunity to actually get out what's been on their mind or what's been bothering them. I mean, men will admit sexual trauma, abuse, women too, sometimes not in the first visit, but like the more trust that I develop with them, like the more kind of layers that they peel back about all this stuff that's impacting them. And what I try to do is like have them draw the connections between like that sexual abuse, that sexual trauma, and like their erectile dysfunction or like their issues, in their relationship, their fear of being intimate, right? Like some guys have a hard time making that connection for understandable reasons. They blocked it. They don't understand the connection. But I've had female patients who like every time they have sex, it hurts. And then like they kind of reveal like that they were abused when they were younger. They had an assault when they were younger. And it's like, no shit, like your body is holding on to all this trauma. And so like, look, I'm not a trauma therapist. I don't know how to like help them work through that trauma, but I get them to people who like do public physical therapy, get them to like, I recommend them seeing therapists to be able to help process that. But just drawing that link for them is so impactful. And now they understand why their body is acting a certain way, right? Now they understand or have a little bit of insight into why it hurts to have sex. And so even that for them is like earth-shattering news. And I'm really honored that they trust me enough to share these really personal stories. But it all starts, as you know, right? Like what's your energy walking into the room, right? How are you holding space for them? And like, again, I didn't know that's what I was doing when I started, but the more I've kind of gotten into this world, that's exactly what I'm doing, is just holding space for them to let their stories come out.
This doesn't feel to me, from my experience, like the typical experience that I have when I go see the doctor. I'll admit to you that like I have developed a kind of fear around going and seeing the doctor, even just getting a yearly physical. Some of it's like, I don't know, I've moved around, and so I don't have a consistent relationship. I haven't developed a relationship with the doctor that I go see. But I think it's also when I go in, like, I've never had anything that felt close to the experience of someone giving me their attention and saying, tell me your story. It's just like, it's kind of like, okay, in with the laptop, already starting to take notes, typing, not even looking at me and asking like, what's going on? And you're kind of like, okay, I don't know, I'm feeling this or this is happening. Right. And I think I kind of shut down, and it leads me to a point where I will admit there's probably times where I should be going to the doctor and I'm afraid to go. It doesn't feel like a place that feels safe to me. And so I tend to avoid it. I mean, I'm curious, I don't know, to someone like me, what would your response be?
I mean, it happens all the time, right? And like that is unfortunately the common experience in Western medical practices, right? And so it's too bad. I think it's a shame. I think it's a really reflection on like this, see as many patients as you can, take notes, all this documentation that we have to do, all of this, charting that is the priority, and the patient gets lost in the middle of it. Not all physicians are like that, but the vast majority of them are. I think your experience is exactly why people are looking for alternatives to regular MDs, whether that's like, naturopaths or osteopaths or acupuncturists, right? Because they're taking more time and actually listening to patients and what they're saying. I think a patient relationship is all about, it's a relationship, right? Some are good, some are bad. I have a lot of patients who have seen other providers, whether it's urologists or, from my practice or other practices, and they come to me for another opinion. They're like, wow, this is so different. I'm like, yep, it's going to be different. This is how I try to cultivate that, relationship. And I'm like, I never wear a white coat. I usually have like another jacket on. It's like, a steel corduroy jacket. And this is how I am, right? It's not like doctor or patient. Like it's right. It's like, we're here and I'm just trying to connect with you and help give you some insights into your body, your health, and help you improve your quality of life. Like that's what I'm very much about. So
how did you come to develop this whole approach in the first place? All the way down to asking what's your story, what you wear, how you walk in, how you enter the room. How did this come to be?
So I've actually never told this to pretty much anybody, but when I was in medical school, we had I've never said this to anybody. So we had these patient simulations, and they're like patient actors that would come in, and it was supposed to have you teach you how to talk to patients, to react to patients. And we had to get tested on it. And I went in, this is how I was. I was very, very calm, very like casual, really connecting with the patient. And I remember the physician came out, and I touched the patient. I put my hand on their shoulder, and nice to meet you, as they were walking out. And my proctor, my didactic person, almost failed me. And she was like, "You're way too casual. You're way too personable. Patients want this like doctor, to come in and like tell them what to do and how to do it. And like, you're going to put patients not at ease with this." And I got really upset, because like nothing could have been further than who I am, is to have that. And I remember sitting there being like, well, fuck, if that's what it's like to be a doctor, like maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe this is not how I'm supposed to be. And like, I remember that woman, she was a female proctor, the doctor who was like grading me. And I think about her now as like, my patients absolutely love coming to see me, and the experience they have now. And I'm like, look, nothing could have been further from a reflection of who I am and the type of physician that I want to be. And I think if I had listened to, I think I did listen to that voice for a while, right? I really think I did. When I was a resident, I'd walk around and like thinking like, this is how I was supposed to be. But I remember I had one mentor in particular, who was a younger attending, and her patients loved her, and she would take the time and she would talk with them and she would relate to them. And I'm like, that's more of how I want to be. And I remember when I got into practice on my own after training, I was like thinking, what's the type of physician that I want to be, right? What's the type of like doctor that I want to be? And you try on different hats, right? You try on different styles, but it all kept coming back to that original patient experience. I was like, that is the most me in a doctor-patient relationship. And like, fuck this woman for like thinking that like that was how it was supposed to be. That's how she wanted to do it, but that's not how I'm going to do it. And like, it just took me some time to get comfortable with myself in that capacity. And like, thank God I didn't listen to her. And thank God that's not how I am now, because I'd be fucking miserable trying to deal with patients like that. Like, that would be awful. So I don't know. It's like, I keep finding my own voice, and I'm more comfortable now of who I am as a physician than I ever have been, mainly because I'm so much more comfortable with myself and like what I stand for. Right? I have longer hair. Like, I never used to have longer hair. It was always shorter, and like, the physician, like very clean and proper. And, look, like my long hair turns some patients off. Fine. Like, who cares? If I'm not for you, that's fine. Or like I'm too casual. Fine. There's plenty of formal doctors out there, but like, this is me. I am who I am. And like, I'm okay with that, So there you go.
To me, it's very relatable, because my story reflects, in similar lanes, but the same kind of idea, where I've had this sort of sense of feeling or inner sense of knowing, like, I think I want to maybe just approach things differently. For me, I'm in marketing, so I'm a marketing consultant, and I came up a very traditional corporate route and corporate path, and I just always felt like the black sheep. I didn't really feel like I fit in. So, like, there's this kind of feeling like something about this just feels off. I think I want to approach things differently. And then what feels relatable about it is, but then there was the messages that I was getting from mentors or leaders in my life that was like, no, we're supposed to do it this way. And so you kind of just tune out that feeling inside of you that's like, well, that just doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel like what I want to do. And you tune it out and you tune it out, and it creates this kind of internal turmoil and friction until maybe at some point you start to embrace a little bit of like, well, let me just try this. Let me try this whole being myself thing. And so, and then, I found it's a many year process of continuing to just lean into it a little bit more and a little bit more. And now I'm more vocal about like, yeah, I live in a van, and this is the way that I work, and I'm going to show up sometimes in a sweatshirt, and sometimes, I might not have showered in 2 days, and this is just me. And it doesn't stop the fact that I can do great work. It's not going to prohibit me from doing that. And if someone's like, you know what, I'm just not comfortable with working with someone in this way, I'm getting a lot more comfortable with saying, as you just did, it's okay, then I'm just not for you. And it's taken me a really long time to get here.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, absolutely, right? And I think so much of it's conditioning and just this like layered kind of packing on patterning that we see. And I'd be curious for you, like at least for me, right? My sense is like I had to go through like, what I would consider like a mental break as far as like how unhappy I was in my life with myself, with my like relationship and me as a father, to really start to piece back together and kind of find who I was to be able to be this comfortable. Right. And I think for some men, they either never get to that point or they get to that breaking point, but then they just try to keep building things back with the same tools and the same patterns. But my guess is with you in the marketing world, right? As you've gotten more comfortable with yourself, it's easier to say, good. All right. You don't like me. Like, this isn't going to work. This relationship, that's fine. I'm okay. But that only happens when you're much more comfortable with who you are. And yeah, it's an ongoing process to continue to trust yourself, lean into yourself, and be a true expression of who you are. So, it's not easy no matter if you're a marketing, physician, lawyer, like, no matter what, there's all these like shoulds that we should be doing. So, good for you.
For me, this is actually a relatively recent thing in particular. I had, for the last like 4 or 5 years, up until about November of last year, I worked full-time. I had a full-time job, and then that kind of transitioned into doing some consulting work, mainly working with one leader or mentor who was a part of my life. And it was very much the duality. It was very much an and situation where this person helped me a lot. They taught me a lot. They invested a lot into me. I'm very grateful for all of those opportunities and the things that I was afforded. And I realized it and had a difficult time sort of acting on it. But I realized that this relationship that I had and the dynamic that we had from a work standpoint was very detrimental to my entire life. It caused me a lot of dis-ease in my life where I had a ton of anxiety, and I would have these kind of panic attacks, and I would just I would find myself getting so dysregulated so often to the point where I'm spending, therapy sessions talking about my relationship. And this is a work relationship. It's more than just a work relationship. There was a personal element to it as well. And, it wasn't until November where it wasn't actually totally my choice, but I ended up stopping working with this person. And that kind of launched me on first this like panic, because a majority of my income came from this dynamic in this relationship. And so it was a huge panic, and it was like, I don't know what I'm going to do and who I'm going to be. And, am I even good at the things that I think that I'm good at?
Right.
And
identity crisis.
Me down this. Yeah. Oh yeah. Big time.
Yeah.
And that has led me down this now 6-7 month journey of rediscovering who I am, who I want to be, how I want to position myself. And it's been really healing for me to find people who are okay with that, who are okay with how I want to be and who I want to be. And so it's just kind of through this process of I'm now starting to feel what it can feel like to be in working relationships that don't cause me to get dysregulated all the time, where I can have a more healthy relationship and a healthy balance. So anyway, that was kind of my experience. It was like 4 or 5 years of just maybe accepting a kind of baseline state of dysregulation, and finally having that kind of ripped away from me, going into a mode of huge panic, and then starting to slowly kind of crawl my way out.
Yeah. I can absolutely relate. So, not dissimilar to you. I joined this private practice outside of Boston. It's like the biggest, it's a great private practice outside of Boston. It has different offices kind of around the Boston area. And the office I worked in that I joined was really toxic for me. It was really hard. It started out good because I was very much like, I'm the new guy. I'm just going to kind of mold and do what everybody wants me to do. And like, I'm just going to say yes and like go along with everybody, whatever they wanted. And as soon as I like started having my own opinion and my own voice about my own practice, granted, like we're in private practice, like I am my own boss. But as soon as I started like, hey, I'm going to end patients seeing earlier to be home with my kids, or like, I'm going to take more vacation and work smarter, not longer. Like it became this like super judgmental, toxic environment for me that caused me so much dysregulation. I mean, I was coming home and like replaying all these conversations in my head with my partners, or like replaying like, well, should I have said this or should I have said that? And like, it was creating so much drama. And, you know, there's so much in the medical world about like kind of just soldiering on and being that good soldier and just like kind of keep taking it yes and yes. And that's part of our training, right? I did that for 6 years and, you know, 80 plus hours a week in my training. And so to like pull myself away from that was like a 6-month process of just like keep trying to reassure myself. And like my wife was like, you're okay. It's okay. It's okay that you're changing offices. Like I'm not even changing companies. I'm changing offices. Right. And like, for me, I felt this like huge, like I am disappointing everybody. I'm like failing at my job. And it was an identity crisis for me to like stand up for myself and be like, no, like no more. I can't do this anymore. And I guess it's similar to you in the last 4 or 5 months, right? This sort of freedom that you feel of like changing, kind of being on the other side of that and like going through that process. For me, like every day I'm like, wow, I feel so much better. And like I'm doing similar stuff. I'm changing and adapting things, but I feel more of myself in my practice. My practice is a reflection of me more, and just getting out of that environment where I was judged no matter what. If I did this, I was judged. If I did that, I was judged. I was like, might as well do what I want to do, right? Like I'm going to piss everybody off anyways. It's just been very liberating for me to stand up for myself and find my voice again, because I had lost it over the years of my medical training. So I can relate a lot.
Yeah, well, I'm happy for you. I'm proud of you. I say that because I know exactly how it feels, and I know how good it feels to be able to just have some of that confidence and peace in the person that you are. And
yeah.
You talk about environment, and environment just played such a big role. I think the other maybe commonality we have in this story that we're sharing is having a partner who supports you. And I mean, my wife has played that similar role of just helping me navigate some of these different situations and being a supporter, an encourager, but also someone who reminds me that I am worthy of being myself. I am worthy of being comfortable. I am worthy of relationships in my professional life and outside of it that allow me to be myself. I'm worthy of that. And without her, without my wife's name is Eileen, without her playing that role in my life, I'm not sure I could have really gotten out of some of my own way. So I think, our partners can play a massive role in supporting us and helping us see our situation differently when we're so in it. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, they kind of give you that other perspective, right? I think, I had to be careful with my wife, because my wife is, she's an incredible, powerful woman. I mean, she's like a priestess. She has like her own big company. And so like for me personally, I was outsourcing some of my support onto her too much. And then we kind of became in this kind of like coach role. And like, that's not good, in my opinion, for a relationship, right? Like it's hard to have like passionate sex with like your coach. Like that just doesn't, it was like kind of the energy, the dynamics were off. And so we had like, which was really great for me. Like a lot of this kind of happened as I'm going through my own growth, through Sacred Sons and through a mentor that I met through there and working with him, and leading into more of this work. I was able to kind of source a little bit more support outside of my relationship so that Sarah, my wife, could maintain my wife. And I wasn't always looking to her to like be that for me, because I started to rely on that too much and the dynamics just kind of got off. And so we had to like, wait, this is not good. Let's, how do we kind of rebalance things, or how do we go back to the kind of kind of some of the polarity that, is really important in our relationship. So I don't know if that's been your experience with Eileen, but that was definitely true.
Yeah. So how did you go about doing that? Because, we'll actually talk about that pretty often in our couples therapy. We're both entrepreneurs.
Yep.
We work together a lot. We also spend 24/7 together almost, because we live in 70 square feet and we're all
right.
But that's one of the things that I actually shared on a recent podcast. Actually, it was a mutual friend's podcast.
Is that Angela's? Yeah.
So
awesome.
I had shared on here, we have found it difficult at times to navigate being coworkers, being a husband and wife, being kind of coach and mentor and mentee.
Yep.
And those are all a lot of different roles to throw into one relationship. So how did you navigate that?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, Sarah and I don't work together, which is good. We sometimes will teach together. We have a marriage program that we teach together. But, for me and for us, we have clearly defined roles, right? So we have clearly defined, what's the business of the relationship and the marriage. And we try to keep that contained within itself. Right. And then we have a romantic relationship, which kind of has its own entity and own energy in of itself. And I think some of the challenges that, I have my best friend, he works with his wife. He's the operations person for her. And they navigate this a lot. And I'm always talking to him about hey, it's going back and forth between these roles, while can feel clunky in the beginning when you name them and when you actually designate time for those different roles. The way I feel, at least, it allows you to enter that different energetic space of okay, we're not going to talk about, the logistics of where we're going next in the camper, right? Or we're not going to talk about our business and things like that. We're just going to connect with the relationship, the energetics of who we are as a couple, and that married kind of, that relationship there. And so when you start to pull apart and tease it out and then can define it, I think it's easier to stay in those energies where it's so easy to just get meshed with all of it, because again, you're 70 square feet, you have all these different, businesses and with it. The big tricky one was the coach one. And I didn't realize it was happening. I have to admit, this was Sarah who was I don't like this. I don't want to be your coach. I can't be your coach. I'm fuck, but you're so good at it. She's so good. And, it just had to be look, so you need support outside of me, right? You need to have someone you can talk with outside of me. And I've had coaches on and off, but spurred me to get, another coach to help me navigate what I was going through, how I was trying to build the business, how I was trying to build my men's program, how I was trying to get out of the office. It just gave me more of the support outside of her. So she called it, I resisted, and then I knew she was right. So,
I mean, it makes so much sense. Especially, I just like this idea of maybe setting some boundaries or intention around when you're wearing certain hats. And, recently, I think I've been reflecting on a lot on, especially in this lifestyle, when we're both entrepreneurs, we work together, we're in a very active stage of building and growing our businesses. We live in this van, there's constantly things to do.
Yeah.
We've got to figure out, like you said, where are we going next? Where are we parking? Where are we getting water? Where are we getting food? Do we have enough power? Is our toilet full? There's all these logistical things that you add on to everyday life that we're having to do all the time. We're having to always figure out. And then there's all the logistics of our businesses and, launches coming up and all these things. So it is so easy to default into we're always doing something. We've got to be figuring out the next thing.
Yep.
And what that doesn't leave is a whole lot of time to just connect on an emotional level, like the husband and wife that we are.
Yep. Correct. And the way, at least for us, and we had those things, and then you throw in kids in the mix. We didn't have the van to deal with, we threw kids in the mix. Right. And then it's it becomes everything but that. Right. And so what we do is we have every Sunday we have a logistics business meeting where we look at what the week looks like, what the schedule is, the childcare. So we run our family like a business, and it stays contained within that. And so it's not just like popping off questions about the business when we're like brushing our teeth at night, or like when we're trying to connect on a date night, right? I used to do this all the time. Driving home from a date night, it was great. And then I'm like, hey, did you pay the nanny last week? And Sarah's like, what the fuck? Like, I don't want to talk about that now. But like, I had this like running thing in my head all the time. It's always going. And so like for me, like I have a note on my phone that's like where I just dump things all the time. And, you know, we talk about it on a weekly basis. And then for Sarah, like what I'll do is like, if it's pressing, if it can't wait till Sunday, I'm like, hey, are you available for logistics? And sometimes she's like, yes, or sometimes she's in a creative flow, or sometimes she's like not available for that. She's like, no, not right now, but like, let's touch base later. And I'm like, okay. But because I have it like, you know, in here, I don't have to keep ruminating it all the time. Right. And so, yeah, it's like a weekly business logistics meeting. It has really helped us separate out the business of our marriage and our family from like the relationship side of it. So now like when we go out on dates, like, it's like, we do not talk logistics. And sometimes one of us will try to cheat. And then it's like, no, like we're not talking about that now, right? Like that's logistics. And so you hold that boundary, because otherwise it just gets broken all the time. It's inevitable with life and all that you're trying to deal with. I can't imagine throwing a van into it, you know, and like trying to live that close together as well too. Like it's a whole other thing as well.
It's got some unique challenges, but I'm it's not quite as challenging as having children in the mix, which we don't have yet. So I'm sure that comes with a lot of unique challenges as well. There's a million other things I want to that I want to ask you about. The thing that I think to wrap up our conversation that I'm really curious about is the farm. And,
yeah.
You know, it's aligned to a vision that Eileen and I have for our lives. I don't know if it'll be a farm, but we are imagining ourselves outside of a small town somewhere in northern Michigan, hopefully on a lot of property, which is just interesting because people who knew me 5-10 years ago, I was like a big city guy and I was that lifestyle, and that's where I wanted to be. I'm curious how the farm came to be.
Well, I'll tell you, you want the short version or the long version? Somewhere in between. Medium. All right. So I was a resident in San Francisco, and we knew Sarah grew up outside of Boston. I grew up in Texas. Sarah did not want to move to Texas. We knew we were going to go back to Massachusetts, and we were looking for property. We were looking for homes, right, to move after my chief year was over with. And one at the Thanksgiving, we had a little bit too much to drink, and we forgot to hit the price max filter on like, you know, whatever, Zillow or whatever it was. And this home popped up, and it was like, and to preface this, 6 months earlier, Sarah in a retreat wrote out a vision for what she wanted her like dream thing to be. And it was a home with, you know, fields, a lake, a yurt temple space to hold like ceremonies and retreats, and, you know, outside of Boston. And like, no shit, sure enough, like that comes up on the search of like outside of Boston. And I'm like sitting here being like, oh, fuck, like we can't afford this. How the hell are we going to do this? And so fast forward, like, you know, Sarah literally flies out, you know, 2 weeks later to the property, sees the property, has this remembrance of like, the couple who owned it, she was a therapist, and Sarah went to her for therapy in high school, which was the first time she started dealing with like emotional eating and like all of her, which is how she got into what she did at the, you know, back in early entrepreneur days. But she was one of the first people to talk to her about this. So here Sarah is like in her like high school therapist home, we're like trying to figure out how to arrange to like buy this crazy property. It has fields, it has a lake, it has a home. It has like a 1-bedroom, beautiful yurt that's constructed for us. And it's like, this was the vision 5-6 years in the future, all of a sudden, like right in our lap. And like, again, we had no idea how we were going to afford it. It was way over what we thought we could afford. And we got really creative with the owners. They really wanted to sell it to us. They didn't want to sell it to like a developer who's going to chunk up the land because it's 24 acres. They didn't want to sell it to a school that was going to turn it into a school. And so we had this like really creative, you know, buyout process where we bought as much as we could in the first down payments of stuff. And then 5 years later, we had the opportunity to buy the last essentially 6 acres at a pre-negotiated price. And so we just kept like working at it. And then spring of last year or 2 years ago would have been 5 years. We bought the rest of the land, rest of the property. And so now we steward it, and it's amazing. You know, Sarah runs retreats out of there. She has, 150 people, 150 women come in the fall. I run much smaller retreats out of there. You know, Sarah does, tonight she has like 60 women coming to the Moon Lodge. The kids and I, because we're like building a house now. So like we're in a hotel for tonight, getting out of there so that Sarah can have the space, which we're all living in right now. So it's like a crazy, it's crazy right now. We're living in a 1-bedroom in the temple space. Sarah and I have a mattress on the floor. It's like we're just making it work as we're building literally our dream home on our dream property. And I will never complain about it. We've moved 3 times in the last 9 months, and we're just making it work with the 3 kids, and they're on board, and we have challenges, and it is what it is. But we're really blessed. It's a really beautiful piece of land. Feel very fortunate that we can steward it and help, bring people to the land and help. It's a really magical piece of land. There's a lot of healing that goes on. So it's great bringing people, both men and women, there. It's awesome.
It's a beautiful story. I appreciate you being willing to share it. For many reasons, felt like we were meant to connect today. I mean, that aligns so much to the vision that Eileen and I have for our future and our lives. And so I'm curious to just hear more and learn more about what you all are doing. So might have to come back in the future so we can do a part 2 to this conversation.
Dude, anytime. I'd love to do a part 2. And if you find yourself on the East Coast traveling to the van, you definitely have to roll through. So for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for being willing to go deep with me. Thank you for being willing to share some of your story. If people wanted to find you or connect with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, for sure. So on Instagram, it's at Jonathan Brajtbord, which we'll put it in there because it's hard to spell. And then my website is just jonathanbrajtbord.com. There you can read about like my online program, the retreats that I do twice a year. If you live in the Boston area and you want me to be your urologist, I'm happy to do that as well. Those are probably the best way. Instagram, and then through my website, you can sign up for our newsletter that we do now once a month to connect and just talk to our kind of guys on the list. So
awesome, Jonathan. I appreciate your time. Thanks, man.
Yeah, Chad. Thanks so much for these conversations. I mean, it's great that you're out there leading this and having these conversations with guys to understand that they can, open up and be more of themselves, no matter if they're in, marketing, physician, lawyer, doctor, whatever. So it's all about who you are. So thanks.
Agreed, man. That's what it's all about.
I mean, I'm really interested to hear what you might have taken away from this episode. I gotta tell you, I took so many things away about adding depth to our relationships, and just this idea where we think we need pills or these like quick fixes for these things that we're experiencing, and how it can be a reflection of some of the emotional things that we're experiencing and going through that are beneath and below the surface. The thing that I've most immediately impacted into my life, and Eileen and I have impacted into our lives, is this idea of like this logistics meeting that Dr. Jonathan talked about, how him and his wife will have this meeting on Sundays to talk about the logistics of the week, the business of running their family. If you're familiar with my wife and I's story, we both are entrepreneurs. We work together. We run businesses together. And I think that can have a real impact on the level of intimacy that we have in our relationship when you're connecting as co-workers and as business partners, and connecting as husband and wife. Those are two like very different mindsets, very different energies. So we've immediately started bringing this logistics meeting idea into our marriage and setting some more boundaries around when we talk business and when we are just husband and wife enjoying being with each other and enjoying our relationship. It felt like it was a conversation that was meant to happen, as Dr. Jonathan talked about building this farm out in the Boston area and what him and his wife are doing and how it mirrors what Eileen and I's goals and vision for the future is. It was just so cool. So I would love to hear some of your thoughts about what you took from this conversation. You can do that either by following the show on Instagram at A Level Deeper, or send me an email directly, aleveldeeperpod@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. There's a train in the background. I love dissecting these conversations. I love hearing your thoughts. I hope that this can be a two-way street and you can be brought into these conversations. And I look forward to initiating in some of that. So yeah, hope to hear from you. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to leave a rating or review. Actually, don't feel free. I ask you to. Please leave a rating or review. It would be great. It really helps me grow the show, adds to some of the legitimacy of the show, and contributes to it finding more people. So thank you for doing that in advance. I will have another conversation for you on Tuesday of next week. I look forward to sharing it with you then. We'll see you.